Stormy Daniels' allegations in her desire to come forward. He then engaged with Donald Trump, according to the prosecutors, about how to silence her story. And that for several weeks, after agreeing to pay her off with a certain amount of money, they tried to go several weeks, the prosecutors lay out, from actually paying her. And that is when Stormy Daniels, according to prosecutors, became frustrated with the delay. Just 2 weeks before the election, Michael Cohen made 2 phone calls to Donald Trump on October the 26th. And the prosecution says that Cohen called the defendant and then ended up crossing the street to a bank and opened a new account. And that very day, the next day, he wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. And what the prosecution is outlining is that this was at the direction of Donald Trump, an effort by Michael Cohen to conspire to influence the 2016 election. Again, I say all of this is significant because Donald Trump, if you go all the way back to 2018, and ever since, he has obfuscated on his answer. But he, back in 2018, after the initial story broke of the Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen $130,000 arrangement, in April of 2018, Donald Trump was denying that he was aware of it and instead said that would have been a Michael Cohen thing. Now what the prosecution is laying out in a clear timeline is that they intend to present to the jury evidence and testimony that disputes that, and that, in fact, Donald Trump was at the core of ordering this and coordinating the effort to silence Stormy Daniels, and therefore the reimbursement checks he made to Michael Cohen in 2017, he had full knowledge of what he was paying Michael Cohen for.
Maya, the importance for the prosecution bringing the jurors back to that 2016, what was happening and why that's so important.
So important because they have to show intent, right? That's the agreement to conceal with the intent to unlawfully interfere in the election. That's their case. That's their getting to a felony. And it was October 7th, 2016, that Access Hollywood comes out. The very next day, Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, and Hope Hicks are on a call together. I mean, the proximity of that and what we know that Michael Cohen's going to say about being directed and what he was directed to do from the beginning. But that's why all of these things. And then October 26th, this is the Donald Trump is directing this. He knows it. He's directing it. That's the inference that they're sharing, that they're saying the evidence is going to demonstrate. And this is why I keep saying time is a witness, because it's also the proximity in time. That point about right after 2 calls with Donald Trump, then Michael Cohen goes across the street and opens a bank account. And oh, by the way, you're going to have a transcript of an audio tape where they're actually talking about how Michael Cohen is setting this up. All of this both helps to corroborate the points that we know Michael Cohen is probably going to make, but it's also to say, look at all of this together, and you can't stay away from the fact that Donald Trump is directly in this. That's what the prosecution is saying to the jury.
And going back to intent, another key line from this opening statement by the prosecution is, quote, it was election fraud, pure and simple. And Colangelo promising that the jurors will see evidence of just how concerned Trump's campaign was about this story getting out there before the election. In fact, it sounded like Davidson and Pecker were in communications. Again, a couple of the key players involved in this hush money scheme, as alleged by the prosecution, that Davidson texted Pecker on election night, quote, what have we done? What's your reaction to that?
I think it's interesting and what I expected that are almost working in reversed order here. Because what's odd about this crime is that well, not odd, but expected, the kind of the core crime we're going to be focused on happens first, which is the election interference. And it's not only very months later where we kind of get to the boring documents here. So I think what's interesting is that they're basically proving up this core election interference claim, which has to do with 15 and 16 and the campaign and all these things. And we haven't gotten yet to, all right, what's on the piece of paper? What's on the documents? Why does it say legal services? But what's interesting here is, like, that's not as fascinating for a jury. You really have to prove up this whole secondary narrative. And then later on, we're going to get to those boring documents. But I think if you lock the jury into that first story and they believe that Donald Trump was directing and overseeing this conspiracy to interfere with the election, when you get to those documents, I think it's a lot easier for a jury to see, like, why those documents say what they say. Those 34 counts can almost become a box-checking exercise if you believe that initial conspiracy about the election. I think that's why we're seeing it in this order.
And Vaughn, a familiar name that the prosecution just mentioned, Alan Weisselberg, who is not going to be testifying, but it's one that they just brought up.
Alan Weisselberg was the chief financial officer for the Trump Organization. And folks will recall, literally 2 weeks ago, we were standing at this very courthouse when he went and pled guilty to perjury charges stemming from his testimony last year in the civil fraud trial. Now, he is currently serving several months in jail at Rikers here in New York. And Alan Weisselberg is somebody who previously served prison time as part of the tax scheme through the Trump Organization. But Alan Weisselberg has never testified against specifically Donald Trump. Largely, that is what has led him to spending time at Rikers. And what is notable about Alan Weisselberg is the fact that we do not expect him to come forward as a testament either in the defense of Donald Trump or at the behest of the prosecution. Because, number one, there were questions about what Alan Weisselberg would actually testify to. And specifically, this is in the district attorney's interest to not have him testify because Michael Cohen is alleging that Alan Weisselberg was the other individual who he had discussed the exact specifics of the reimbursement plan for the Stormy Daniels payment. So essentially, they're going to be able to present to the jury Michael Cohen's story of his conversation with Alan Weisselberg and how in 2017 he would be reimbursed on $35,000 checks for the payment that he was personally making of $130,000. Michael Cohen is also going to testify that the amount that he was reimbursed was actually more than doubled, which hits at the heart of the prosecution's argument to the jury that this shows just how important it was to Donald Trump to cover this up. And so Alan Weisselberg is the other individual who Michael Cohen says was involved in that conversation. But because Alan Weisselberg is at Rikers and unwilling to testify as a witness, this is hitting at the heart of an issue for the defense team, for Donald Trump here, and one that the district attorney's office is less concerned about the waters being muddied in front of the jury over this particular debate over the reimbursement plan for the Stormy Daniels payment.
Okay, so, Caroline, we've now been introduced to Michael Weisselberg. We've been Alan Weisselberg, excuse me. They've talked about Michael Cohen. Yeah. They've talked about Keith Davidson, Stormy Daniels' attorney at the time, Hope Hicks. I mean, so lots of names. This sounds like a lot if you are the jury to be trying to understand, to wrap your head around who did what, who was in which position.
Yeah.
Are they, do you think, doing a good job? Would you be the person doing this? Is this how you would approach it?
Look, they're setting the stage. And with respect to Weisselberg, I mean, talk about somebody, I mean, this man has given up his whole life in service to Trump, right? There is apparently reporting evidence that there are notations that Weisselberg made doing the math in terms of how to repay Cohen, this $130,000, as Vaughn noted. They actually ended up paying him more than double plus a $60,000 bonus, I believe it was, so that he could comply with the tax laws, because they knew that he would, the tax authorities would be taking 50% of that. This goes to another really interesting point. The state has put forth 3 different theories for that secondary crime. We've been talking about the election law violation, election interference, but one of them is also tax fraud. And it's a really interesting theory on the tax fraud. It's that, they bent over backwards actually to, up to the amount. They weren't trying to take money away from the state of New York. They actually jumped through hoops to make sure that Cohen was reimbursed for the whole $130,000, and the New York State tax authorities would get their due as well.
And so, Chuck, talking about Cohen, the prosecution in there. And, Maya, you were saying about bringing up the weaknesses of your case early on. Chuck, Colangelo is just mentioning Michael Cohen, and he says you will learn, and we will be very upfront about the fact that Michael Cohen, like other witnesses in this trial, has made mistakes in his past.
Yeah, not just mistakes, Jose. I mean, Michael Cohen is a criminal, and Michael Cohen is a liar. But the government didn't select Michael Cohen as a witness. Donald Trump did. And they're kind of stuck with him. Not to be too cute, but if all of my witnesses at all of my trials could have been nuns and librarians, that would have been wonderful. But that's not who you find committing crimes, by and large. And so Michael Cohen is there because Donald Trump had confidence in him that he could use Cohen to make a hush money payment. Hush money payments aren't unlawful in and of themselves. But it was because of those payments that Trump ended up directing that his books and records be doctored. So, yeah, these are the witnesses you get in trials. It's interesting to me, Jose, if this trial in some ways is unique because it's a former president as a defendant. And in other ways, it's extraordinarily ordinary, right? These are how openings are done. This is how evidence is adduced. This is how and why witnesses are called. You could walk into any courtroom in America and hear a judge charge the jury with these sort of instructions before they hear opening statements. And then you would hear these sort of opening statements, and you would see these sorts of witnesses in almost any criminal trial. What's different here? Donald Trump is the defendant.
Joining us now is former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Barbara McQuaid. And Barbara, they're obviously trying to just get ahead of potential credibility questions around Michael Cohen, and Colangelo specifically saying Cohen's testimony will be backed up by other witnesses you will hear from, including David Pecker and Keith Davidson. He says it will be backed up by emails, text messages, phone logs, business documents, and it will be backed up by Donald Trump's own words on tape, in social media posts, in his own books, and in videos of his own speeches. And he goes on to say, there will be no doubt Donald Trump is guilty of falsifying business records. As you consider all of the evidence the people will present, we ask you to use your common sense. Just your thoughts about the opening statements and what we've learned from the prosecution so far, what jurors are taking in.
Well, one thing that I thought Matthew Colangelo, the lawyer delivering the opening statement for the prosecution, did that I thought was very effective is the first words out of his mouth. This case is about. That is so important for the framing of a case. And what he said is not that case is about falsified business records. He said this case is about a conspiracy to corrupt the 2016 presidential election. And then he goes on to describe not one, but three schemes that they tried to kill. The Stormy Daniels story, the Karen McDougal story, and the story of a doorman, that there was a meeting between Donald Trump and Michael Cohen and David Pecker on August 15th to discuss all of the ways that they would work together to hide and conceal from the public these disparaging stories that would affect the outcome of the 2016 election. And they went on red alert when the Access Hollywood tape came out. And so the falsification of the business records is really just a means to the end of corrupting the 2016 election. And I think that is not only what makes this a crime, it makes it a felony, and it also brings great jury appeal from ignoring this as some trivial mistake on business